Hello again. This is Joe Yudin from Touring Israel, Luxury Private Tours. Today we have a tour guide who approaches her tours a little bit differently than your average tour guide. It's Yael Goodman. Hello, Yael.
Hey Joe, what's up?
Still in this lockdown. Hopefully it's over soon. It looks like it's going to end soon, and itching to get out and about and back to work. I'm
Oh
sure
yeah,
you are as well.
absolutely.
So you started your own company running tours. Does it have a name?
Yeah, I started a company called Run JLM, JLM being short for Jerusalem. I'm born and raised in Jerusalem. And I just kind of fused a lot of passions and loves that I've developed in my life.
So that's great. I mean, you've been a tour guide for what, 20 years at least? We met in
Since 98, yeah,
98. Oh wow. So
98.
longer than I've been a tour guide. I know we met in we did the March of the Living together, which is a week in Poland and a week in Israel, and we've been working together ever since. I was really impressed with how you guide, and I mean, you're definitely one of the better tour guides in Israel. So, and now you're doing these running tours around Jerusalem, being living in Jerusalem for all these decades. Tell us about the tours. Show us some pictures.
So I love running and I love guiding. And I realized that there's a new product. I mean, tourism, as you know, goes to all these niche places where people just want to do what they love and add a little bit. I think fusion is the new magic word. So I saw that this idea exists all over the world for years, all over Europe. And so every time I traveled, I started to become a consumer of these tours just to kind of like be, it was very interesting for me to see what they do. When I came back with my own concept of building running tours, I realized that in Israel, we can do something a little bit more unique because here we're all, I mean, you have to be a tour guide in order to guide. It's the law. You can't just take anyone and guide if you don't have a tour guide license. So I don't think any Joe Schmo who runs can take people on a tour. But you also apparently can't just run with people without having some kind of a running trainer's certification. So I got certified as a running trainer, so I can have both legitimate, accreditations to do this. And I started running around Jerusalem to figure out what kind of a route I want. And Jerusalem's tough because Jerusalem, you run uphill, and then there's another uphill. And you know what you have for dessert? Another uphill. Here you can see a picture of me running without any tourists because, no airplanes came here anymore. And just to show you how empty Jerusalem is, I don't think you've ever seen the Church of the Holy Sepulchre like this in the picture.
No, I think once after a snowstorm back, I think it was 92, I went for a walk around the old city and everything was closed and no one was around, and the Holy Sepulchre was open and I went inside. I was the only one there. But since then, nothing like this. So for those of you who are maybe watching this, not at the moment, we're still in the midst of the coronavirus epidemic. Maybe it's towards the end. But yeah, John, if you could show us that first picture again. Yael, you're leading a tour around the old city. So to the right, you have the walls of the old city, and behind you, you really have the city hall. Is that correct? So you're running right along the seam line. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so when I was trying to build my route, I realized that running in the old city is not an option. Also, Jerusalem is a very complex city. So imagine the attire that you wear when you run. Can't really run through holy places. I really believe in respecting the complexities that Jerusalem, delivers to us. So I moved outside the walls, and I thought it would be a magical opportunity to run around the walls and see what there is outside the walls. Because every tour we take is focused on inside the walls, hitting all the main spots, making sure that we cover all that. So this running tour, it's only an hour and a half. It's an add-on and it's an addition to your regular tour. And, me as a runner, if I go for, a business trip abroad, I want to run and see the site. So it's kind of like you get two in one. And
right.
People, yeah.
Right. What I was going to say, several years ago, I had a column in the Jerusalem Post called "Off the Beaten Track," and I did a 2-part article about the walls of Jerusalem, and there's so much to see just around the walls of Jerusalem. There are tombs, there are ruins from the first temple period, the second temple period, the Crusader period, which is really interesting. There are ancient ritual baths and mikvahs around the old city, and the views of the Mount of Olives and the Mount Zion and the Garden of Gethsemane and the Kidron Valley are just really spectacular. There's just so much to see around the walls, wouldn't you
Yeah,
say?
absolutely, Joe. Everything, I mean, you see so many things when you run. First of all, when you're running and you're in a small group and you look around, you just see things differently. When you run Jerusalem, you feel it in your muscles because it's a tough city, not only to run in, to live in, to guide. Jerusalem is a tough city. And this run is a tough run. But when you run around the old city, you really see also places that were in the city. Today, the Ottoman walls are built, when they were built, but there were other walls before that, 1,000 years ago, 1,500 years ago, where the walls hugged, contained within them different areas. And so in some places, we may be running outside the walls of what Suleiman the Magnificent built, but we're also running inside the walls in different periods of time. So it really depends where you're running through. I really try to focus on a run that will show all the different sides of Jerusalem. If it's ancient and modern, if it's East and West, if it's Jewish and Palestinian, Israeli, Arab, you can see both sides of the city and all three religions. Because if you can take a nugget or a little circle, right, and put it over the map of Jerusalem, where are you going to put that circle? So I really try to find that circle, that within that circle, you just have all this delicious information and beautiful sights that you look at from a different perspective. You're not with a group, you're not with a massive group, you're like sweating. And when you run, you have hormones released in your body. So when you're like 15, 20 minutes in a run, your endorphins are kind of, working over there. And it's like a high feeling, like you run up and not only are you high from the information and from the view, but you're also high because you just ran a really hard hill. So it's been like so much fun to do these running tours. It's really exploring Jerusalem in such a new way.
So Jerusalem, as you said, it's very hilly. Back in Talmudic days, they said it was built on 9 mountains. Today it's on even more mountains. They're not really mountains. They're large hills, that's for sure. But it's very hilly. It's much like San Francisco, where it's one hill after the other after the other. There's also a lot of traffic. It's very difficult to get around unless you're on foot. I mean, today, well, when there were tourists, the only way to get around was on foot. And hopefully, those days aren't far in front of us. But you said it's very difficult. It's very challenging. Do you have different levels? Is there a beginner's tour? Is there a medium tour? Is there a hard tour?
Thank you for that question. Very relevant question. I have a website and I prepared like a questionnaire for people. Like, do you want more talking or more running? When I was doing all my pilots, I always had a difference of people who just wanted to run and, and zip it. Right. Or people who were just kind of like, they needed the break as they're going up that mountain. And so they were very happy to have a short little explanation so their heart rate can go down. So it's very individual. This is very tailor-made. So let's say, but if I have a group of 2 people and there's one better runner and one runner who's not so good, so we'll go with the one who's a little less good because, I'm not going to have any injuries with like these new runners. So I try to make it as easy as going. Also, I'm sure that people understand that I'm not doing this like crazy marathon training and we're going to do intervals and it feels like it at times just because of the topography of the city. But it's more of an experience and get a little of your heartbeat going. It's definitely challenging.
And do you have different routes? Like, for instance, you're going around the old city walls. Is it always around the old city walls, or do you take people to different neighborhoods as well?
Well, I have a flagship tour, which is what I'm talking about. It's like the tour around the walls. And that's what I have. That's what I offer people. But, when you have something if you're window shopping and you have something in the window, you can walk in the store and ask for something specific. And I invite people to walk into the variety. I had someone, she was training for a full marathon. She just came here for some business. And she just wanted to run 20 miles on straight flat land. And she didn't know where to do it in Jerusalem. So since I don't know how to run 20 miles, I called my friend Lipnick, who works in the company. So I have different guides that also run faster, run more. Jonathan is also, he has his master's from Harvard in Christianity. So it's like running with this brain with so much knowledge, Every one of the guides, those of us who run, when you run, you talk to the person who runs with you. You just kind of, talk. That's what the tours are like. And I'm not like stopping and guiding like we're used to. It's more of a conversation. It's like running with interesting people.
Right. But you're also a tour guide, and you're still doing regular tours. What are your favorite sites to guide in Jerusalem?
Well, of course, my number one is the Old City. I love the Old City with all my heart. I'm always surprised that when I go there, there's always something new that I find out every time. But I live in a neighborhood called Abu Tor.
Okay.
And this neighborhood is a fascinating neighborhood. I mean, I've known it's been a fascinating neighborhood ever since I moved here, but I never really got a chance to pause and stop and go inwards and just be here in my home, which is exactly what Corona invited me to do, is to look inwards in my neighborhood and try to figure out where I live. And it's been an incredible journey the past 43 days. I'm not counting, at home with my kids, just researching this neighborhood. And I'd love to share some of the knowledge that I've learned about my neighborhood. So the first picture that we're seeing is actually the entrance to what we call the Greek compound. But before I dive into the story of the Greek compound, I want to go back to the name of the neighborhood, Abu Tor. Abu Tor in Arabic means Abu is the father or the patron of the ox, a bull. A tor in Arabic is a bull. So apparently this guy, Abu Tor, was a general in Salah ad-Din's army. When Salah ad-Din came to conquer Jerusalem at 1187, he had this champion general riding around on his ox, being super successful. And as a gift, Salah ad-Din gave him this neighborhood, this mountain. And he writes it's a mountain below Jaffa Gate, which isn't so far from the truth, where we are right now. We have Mamluk who write to us that when Abu Tor comes here, he is in a place called Dir Modestus. Dir in Arabic is a monastery, and Modestus was a very important patriarch who was actually the one who renovated the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in the 7th century after the Persians destroyed it. So he had a short reign because the Muslims come right after, but in his time, he was a massive builder, and therefore his name was very much glorified. So he's the one that pretty much builds a church up over here on what is later on known. Here's the church. The church that we're looking at right now actually is the modern church. It was built in 1914. Right next to it, I couldn't get a picture because it's ruins under bushes. It would mean nothing to whoever's watching it, is the church that Modestus built. Now let's go further back, Joe, to the time of the New Testament, because I think that's where we can really start to understand the holy geography of Jerusalem. I think in Hebrew we call it hagiographia. Could you help me here, Joe? Hey, hagia is holy, geography. So the holy geography.
Right.
I think that just by saying holy geography, Joe, it's hard to identify spots. It's hard to identify spots. And when we talk about the true identification of places, I think that those words don't ever really make sense, the true identification.
Right.
But here we have a hill that later on was known as the Hill of Evil Counsel. So I basically live in a neighborhood that has this beautiful view of Jerusalem. Thank you. You totally knew I was going there. This is the hill. So there's this entrance to this compound that it's a massive area. This is the view that you see. And what do you see? You see Jerusalem. You see Mount Zion. You see Mount Moriah. It's an amazing point of view of Jerusalem.
See the Mount of Olives. You see Mount Scopus. You see the Kidron Valley. I mean, yeah, it's probably it's an interesting angle. People, when they look at these pictures of Jerusalem, they always see the view from the Mount of Olives or Mount Scopus, which is looking from east to west. Here you're looking from south to north, and you really can see everything.
Everything.
It's definitely interesting view. And Abu Tor, of course, is built on the Hill of Evil Counsel. Why don't you, I mean, that spot has an incredible story.
It does.
Not only in the New Testament, but in the Hebrew Bible as well, doesn't it?
Absolutely. You'll see how everything is going to stitch up so nicely. I mean, this apparently was the hill where Caiaphas, the high priest, had his summer home. So being a priest and having, that kind of an income back 2,000 years ago, you could afford 2 homes. So he had one home inside the walled cities, right? That home today is identified as Peter Igali Canto. And he had a home, which is on Mount Zion. And at the time,
to the left, we see that triangular gray dome on the left.
And he had another home. He had a summer home that was believed to be here on the mountain. Mm-hmm. There are ruins here of going back to the Canaanite period. I mean, every mountain with a rock on it was worshipped. Abu Tor, this mountain, also had a big rock on it. So we have all the ancient history, like we have in many places in Israel, on the compound over here as well. We know from the New Testament, I think the 3 synoptic
Gospels,
thank you. I'm like Evangelion, how do you say that in English? Thank you. Talk about that the night where Jesus has the Last Supper, he goes to Gethsemane, and then he's taken to where Peter Igali Canto is. So what are we talking about? What is the event that is believed to happen here on the Hill of Evil Counsel? Prior to that whole event, okay, I'm like Mark 14, they talk about the plot to kill Jesus.
Right.
So apparently, according to Christianity and to many researchers, the Hill of Evil Counsel is where that plot took place.
Right.
Where
Judas conspires to kill or to point out who Jesus was to the high priest Caiaphas's.
Right. And I think this plot is even before they got Judas into the picture. It says here, and after 2 days, it was the Passover and the feast of unleavened bread. And the chief priests and the scribes too, sought how they might take him by trickery and put him to death. But they said, not during the feast. Okay? So they had a plot before that whole thing happened. And if you think of this location over here, right? And you think of a high priest having a home, you got a great view over here. Right. Furthermore, in Josephus, this place is mentioned. Josephus mentions this place when Titus comes to conquer Jerusalem. And he builds a wall. And he mentions this area as one of the walls that went before he conquered Jerusalem. And you can see, if you're a Roman conqueror, dude, this is the place to be before you're going to conquer a city. Right. And he mentions that there's a high priest that's buried here called Hananiah ben Nedavai. And you know what Abu Tor is called in Hebrew. It's called Givat Hananiah. Mm-hmm. I'm just going to open brackets very quickly and say that after the War of 1948, all the neighborhoods in Jerusalem had an Arab name, but had a Hebrewized name. Right. So Talbiya being Komemuyot, Baka being Geulim, right? And Abu Tor being Givat Hananiah. None of these names stuck. Right. Okay, the good old names of the Jerusalem neighborhood stuck. But here we have the explanation as to why this place is called Givat Hananiah. Furthermore, they say that Hananiah was the father-in-law of Caiaphas. So here you have, so if we weren't really sure if there was a summer home here, if there were high priests who had a summer home, Josephus tells us there were homes of high priests in this location.
Right. And Josephus being, of course, the Jewish general turned Roman historian who changes sides and writes the books that we know all about this time period. That the Hill of Evil Counsel also is one of the candidates for when King Solomon married all those foreign wives, he built some temples to the foreign wives, and one of the temples he builds on that hill was to the god of Malik, the god of war and fire, where the Canaanites would or the Phoenicians would sacrifice their children alive in fire. And the Bible tells us that that's one of the reasons that after King Solomon dies, there's a civil war between the north and south of Israel, and the north breaks off from the south, being the capital of being Jerusalem, and we have two new entities, the kingdom of Israel in the north and the kingdom of Judea in the south. So that in itself is interesting. And we have the Himnon Valley, don't we? Which also plays a part in Christianity, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And interesting you say that, because there's a street here called Ein Rogel. And Ein Rogel is the border between the tribe of Judea and the tribe of Benjamin. So you're like right on the spot over there. And, I don't know if you know this following fact, but in Abu Tor, let's take it back a step so we can understand what we're talking about and get it into context. But Jerusalem was a city where everyone lived within the walls until around 1860. There was nothing outside the walls prior to that. We have a Jewish entrepreneur, Moshe Montefiore, right, who purchases Mishkanot Sha'ananim, the first neighborhood outside of Jerusalem, with some philanthropical help, Yehuda Torah, and they build the first neighborhood. At the same time, Christians exit the city and Muslims exit the city, meaning, growing up in Jerusalem as a Jewish girl, I only heard the Jewish exit of the walls. When I became a tour guide, I realized that there are other stories, but that was my narrative. The people who built the neighborhoods outside of Jerusalem, many of them were just, people who really wanted to help Jews and give them all the money and support them and help them, like Moshe Montefiore. But there was another kind of entrepreneurs who were moneymakers, who saw a business opportunity. And one of these people was a man named Yosef Bai Nevon. Yosef Bai Nevon was the one who got the franchise to build the train from Jaffa to Jerusalem. He was a macher, he was a big businessman. And he also builds two homes in Abu Tor. Abu Tor was also a neighborhood from the exit of the walls. Now, this is I was surprised to hear this. I don't know if this is the first time you're hearing this, but when I found out about Batei Yosef, which are two long houses, kind of like Mishkanot Sha'ananim, that were built here for Jews, but the Jewish population who came to live here paid legit rent to stay here, but it wasn't easy because they were living in the heart of an Arab neighborhood where all the other ones were kind of removed. So if we start to stitch things up, we already know that there's an Arab neighborhood here because Abu Tor, the general of Salah ad-Din, came here, and there's a small establishment that's being built over here. So we already know that there's some kind of a Muslim life on the hill of Abu Tor. The reason Yosef Bai Nevon chose this area is because it had a view. They had this view that we're looking at right now. Because when people moved out of the old city, they needed to feel a little bit close to the old city because it was such a big difference to move out of a wall, of being hugged around a wall, no matter how poor you were, how many diseases you got, or how expensive the rent was. That's what you wanted because that's what you knew. But these people move out. There were big riots in 1929. The Arabs of Abu Tor totally protected their Jews. They called them their Jews, and they hid them in their homes and protected them. But after this incident, the Jews left. And from 1930 and on, these homes, which are still in Ein Rogel Street, the street below me, they're very hard to find because, the building is kind of like building over and expanding here and adding a floor and adding a balcony. It's very, we call it like hickledy-pickledy building where you just kind of patch things on. So those buildings are still there. They're just kind of hidden. So I found that very interesting, that story.
Oh, absolutely. One of the things I love about Jerusalem is all the buildings hidden in these little neighborhoods. For instance, I love taking tours to Rehavia and visiting Jason's tomb, which is this pyramid tomb with apartment building on the left and then apartment building on the right, and it's this Hellenistic Greek Maccabean tomb of one of the Maccabees, and you would never know it's there unless you're with someone who knows that it's there. And there's in all these different neighborhoods throughout Jerusalem, there's these little gems of places. There's a tomb that's maybe the real tomb of Jesus and Talpiot, and there's all over Jerusalem. So when you do run through these areas, do you point things like this out?
Absolutely. I love that. Like you, I mean, it's so fun to show like these little things, these little pointers. And especially in Jerusalem, I mean, every stone you lift, you can find a first temple tomb, you can find a water cistern. And there's my family.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? I mean, you have a very interesting background. You're not your typical Ashkenazi Jew from America who was inspired on an Israel trip and never left like me. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your family?
Well, this is my family. You can see in the picture Justin, my husband, Noam, Talia, and Nadav, my kids, and we've been hiding out in the monastery throughout this quarantine. It's a great area. We've built a fort. We've done picnics here. It's exactly within the perimeter that we're allowed to exit the house.
Mm-hmm.
I was born and raised in Jerusalem, but my mom was a Roman Catholic from Oklahoma, came from a Chickasaw Indian family. And my dad came from a very unaffiliated Jewish family from a small town in Springfield, Massachusetts. And they met in the Peace Corps. They were full-on hippies in the 60s, and they met in training in New Mexico. They knew each other for a day, and apparently there was a location where they both wanted to serve in Bolivia on the lake of Titicaca. It's supposed to be this beautiful place. Mm-hmm. And so they looked at each other and they're like, you want to serve there? Okay, so let's just get married, because it was for a married couple, and then we'll figure it out. So they get married in La Paz, Bolivia. And my mom sends a letter to her parents saying that she's marrying a man named Jerry Goodman and that he's from Massachusetts and he's a Jew. I mean, to think of my Roman Catholic grandparents getting this letter from their 6th out of 7 kid. Okay, they're a large family. Mm-hmm. They sent my great uncle Jack, who was a Jesuit priest serving in Brazil at the time, to go and stop the wedding. So my great uncle Jack, we call him Grunkle Jack, goes to La Paz, Bolivia, met my dad. He's like, well, I really have nothing to say here. Walks my mom down the aisle. They lived in, they lived in Bolivia for 2 years. And at some point, my dad looked at my mom and said, do you mind becoming a Jew? And my mom said, sure. I don't know if she really knew what that meant or what it entailed. And so they flew to Massachusetts. My mom converted. They took some Talmud books, some Mishnah books, some Torah books, and they studied Torah in the Andes.
Wow.
And, yeah.
Very, very interesting background. So, you do regular tours, you do running tours, of course. You can book all these tours through Touring Israel, no problem. But I'm sure people can find your website. What is your website?
runjlm.com.
runjlm.com. Yael Goodman, thank you so much for taking the time during this lockdown to be with us. Shout out to Jonathan Rose in the background, a Wendy Perrin trusted travel expert for Israel for 2020. There he is. And thanks again, Yael. Hopefully we can see each other in person soon and get out there and tour around Jerusalem.
That would be great. If I could get you running with me, I'll be happy.
I'm game. Absolutely.
Yeah. Awesome.
Okay, it's a date.
It's a date.
Talk to you later.
Talk to you later. Bye.
Thank you.